I've always believed that the worst people you'll ever meet are the ones who think a steering wheel gives them permission to become someone else. That belief came from one night in late October when I was driving home from visiting my older sister 3 hours away. It was almost 11 at night, and the interstate was unusually empty except for the occasional semi-truck rolling through the darkness like a moving building. The weather had turned colder than expected, and a light mist hung over the road just enough to blur distant headlights. I had my cruise control set a little below the speed limit because the pavement was damp, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The radio was quietly playing classic rock, my phone battery was nearly dead, and I was looking forward to getting home, taking a hot shower, and forgetting about work the next morning. About 40 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights racing toward me in the rearview mirror. They were weaving through the sparse traffic at an insane speed, flashing their high beams at every vehicle that happened to be in front of them. I moved into the right lane as soon as I safely could, expecting them to pass without a second thought, but instead the black pickup slowed down until it was directly beside me. I glanced over for only a second and saw a man in his 40s with a thick beard gripping the wheel with one hand while yelling something I couldn't hear through the glass. His passenger, another man wearing a baseball cap, was laughing while pointing at me. I figured they had mistaken me for someone else or were just drunk, so I kept my eyes on the road and ignored them. After a few seconds, they accelerated ahead, and I assumed that would be the end of it. It wasn't. About 5 minutes later, I caught up to them because they had slowed down to nearly 50 miles an hour in the passing lane, blocking traffic for no reason. When I carefully moved around them on the right, the driver suddenly swerved toward my lane without signaling. I slammed my brakes and barely avoided the guardrail. My heart was pounding, but I managed to stay in control. I hit the horn once more out of panic than anger. The pickup immediately dropped behind me again, this time so close that I couldn't see its headlights anymore. They were practically touching my rear bumper. I sped up slightly, hoping they'd lose interest, but they matched every change in speed. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I changed lanes, they changed lanes. It felt deliberate. I considered calling the police, but my phone had only 1% battery left, and I was in an area where service constantly disappeared. I tried anyway. The call failed before it even started. I plugged the phone into my car charger, but it was so old that it barely charged at all. I kept telling myself they would eventually turn off at one of the exits. Instead, they stayed behind me for another 15 miles. Every now and then they would flash their high beams repeatedly or drift so close that I was sure they were about to hit me. I stopped looking in the mirror because it only made me more nervous. Eventually I saw signs for a rest area and decided I'd pull in where there were security cameras and hopefully other people around. As soon as I put on my signal, the pickup did the same thing. My stomach dropped. I kept driving past the exit instead, pretending I had changed my mind. The truck continued following me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't random anymore. These guys had chosen me. The interstate became increasingly isolated, with long stretches of forest on both sides and no towns in sight. Every few miles another semi would pass, but otherwise we were alone. I noticed the pickup briefly pull into the left lane before speeding alongside me again. The passenger rolled down his window despite the cold air and held something up. At first I thought it was a flashlight because of the reflection, but then I recognized the shape immediately. It was a handgun. He wasn't pointing it directly at me, just holding it where I could clearly see it before smiling and tapping it against the door. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep the car steady. I knew if I reacted suddenly, they might actually use it. I slowed my breathing and stared straight ahead as though I hadn't noticed anything. The truck accelerated again and disappeared into the darkness ahead. For a brief second, I thought they had finally gotten bored. But less than a mile later, I rounded a gentle curve and saw the black pickup parked sideways across the shoulder with its headlights turned off. Both men were standing outside beside the road. As my headlights reached them, the driver stepped into my lane and raised one arm, forcing me to choose between hitting him or stopping my car. I instinctively slammed on the brakes, and before my car had completely stopped, both men started running straight toward me, one of them gripping something long and metallic that gleamed under my headlights. And that was the exact moment I realized I had driven directly into whatever they had been planning all along. I had no time to think. The instant I saw both men charging toward my car, instinct took over. I dropped the transmission into reverse, stomped on the accelerator, and the tires screamed across the wet pavement as the car lurched backward. One of the men swung the metal object. Now I could tell it was a tire iron against my front fender, leaving a loud crack that echoed through the empty highway. The other reached for the driver's side door handle, but lost his footing on the slick asphalt as my car shot backward. I cranked the steering wheel hard enough that my arms hurt, managed to angle around the pickup blocking part of the lane, then slammed the car into drive and floored it. The engine protested before finally catching enough speed to launch me past them. In my mirror, I watched both men sprint back toward their truck. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear the engine. I kept expecting a gunshot to explode through the rear window, but none came. Instead, a second later, the pickup's headlights snapped on, flooding the highway behind me with white light as they accelerated after me. I had never been so aware of how isolated I was. There were no houses, no businesses, not even another car in sight. Just miles of dark road surrounded by trees that swallowed every bit of light beyond the shoulder. I grabbed my phone again. 4% battery. One tiny bar of service. I dialed 911 while trying to keep my eyes on the road. The call connected for barely 3 seconds before breaking apart into static and disconnecting completely. I wanted to throw the phone across the car. Instead, I tossed it into the passenger seat and focused on staying alive. The pickup was gaining on me fast. My speedometer climbed past 75, 80, 85. I hated driving that fast in the rain, but I hated the thought of those men catching me even more. They came up behind me again, this time without flashing their lights. They simply stayed inches from my bumper, matching every move I made. Then they bumped me. It wasn't hard enough to spin me out, just a quick shove that sent my steering wheel jerking in my hands. My heart nearly stopped. They hit me again, harder this time. I fought to keep the car straight as the tires momentarily lost traction. They weren't trying to pass me anymore. They were trying to force me off the road. Every few seconds the truck nudged my rear bumper, testing how much control I had left. I remembered something I'd heard years earlier, that if someone follows you aggressively, never drive home, because they'll know where you live. That left me with one option: find somewhere public. The problem was, there wasn't anything public for miles. Finally, an overhead sign appeared through the mist. Gas station and diner 2 miles. Relief washed over me. I only had to make it 2 more miles. The pickup must have seen the sign too, because they suddenly moved into the left lane and accelerated until they were beside me again. The driver looked completely calm now, almost smiling. He pointed ahead toward the exit and shook his head slowly, warning me not to take it. Then he accelerated in front of me and began slowing down. I realized they intended to trap me before I ever reached the exit. My only chance was surprise. At the last possible second, I jerked the wheel toward the off-ramp. My tires crossed the painted divider so hard I thought they might lose grip, but somehow the car held together. The pickup overshot the exit before swerving violently onto the shoulder in an attempt to follow. I raced down the ramp and spotted the gas station glowing like a beacon in the darkness. It wasn't busy, but there were enough vehicles parked outside to give me hope. I pulled directly in front of the entrance instead of stopping at a pump. As I jumped out, I shouted that someone was trying to kill me. A middle-aged truck driver, smoking near the door, immediately looked toward the highway while another customer stepped outside. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then the black pickup rolled slowly into the parking lot. It didn't stop. It circled once, the driver staring directly at me through the windshield without saying a word. None of us moved. The truck driver beside me quietly pulled out his own phone while keeping his eyes on the pickup. After what felt like an entire minute, the black truck drove back toward the highway and disappeared into the night. I stayed inside the convenience store with the clerk until state police finally arrived nearly 25 minutes later. They photographed the damage on my car, took my statement, and searched the area, but the pickup was gone. One officer told me road rage incidents sometimes escalated in unpredictable ways, but even he admitted this sounded more like a targeted attack than ordinary anger. They promised to review nearby traffic cameras and asked if I had noticed the license plate. I hadn't. Everything had happened too fast. By 3 a.m, they escorted me back onto the interstate, and I eventually made it home exhausted but alive. For the next week, I couldn't drive without checking every mirror every few seconds. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, wondering what would have happened if I had stopped even a little longer on that highway. Eventually, life settled back into normal, or at least I thought it had. 8 days later, after finishing work, I walked across the employee parking lot toward my car and froze. Resting neatly beneath my windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper. There was no envelope, no signature, just 4 words written in thick black marker. Next time, don't run. 8 days after I found the note under my windshield wiper, I still hadn't told many people about it. The police had taken it as evidence, dusted it for prints, and come up with nothing useful. One detective admitted the handwriting was too generic to identify, and the security cameras in my office parking lot only showed a dark pickup entering for a few minutes before leaving. The resolution wasn't good enough to read the license plate. My coworkers thought someone was playing a prank. My family wanted me to stay with them for a while. I kept trying to convince myself it was over, but every drive felt different. I checked mirrors constantly. If the same vehicle stayed behind me for more than a mile, I changed routes. I stopped taking back roads altogether and only traveled on well-lit highways whenever possible. Weeks passed without another incident, and the fear slowly became something I could push into the back of my mind. Then one Friday evening, nearly a month after everything happened, my manager asked if I could deliver some paperwork to another office across the county before Monday. It wasn't far, maybe 45 minutes each way, and I almost refused. Instead, I convinced myself I couldn't spend the rest of my life hiding from roads. I left just after sunset, finished the delivery, grabbed dinner at a small diner, and started home around 9:30. The route took me along a divided highway that eventually narrowed into a 2-lane road surrounded by farmland. Traffic was almost non-existent. I remember feeling strangely proud of myself for making the drive without panicking. Then I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first they stayed far behind, but after several miles they began closing the distance. I told myself not to overreact. Hundreds of people drove black pickups. Hundreds of trucks use these roads every day. But when the vehicle pulled closer, I recognized the cracked left headlight and the dent near the front wheel, well, the same damage I remembered from the night they had chased me. My mouth went completely dry. The truck stayed behind me without making a move for nearly 10 minutes, as if they wanted me to know they were there. Every instinct told me to speed away, but I remembered what one of the officers had said after the first incident if they ever came back. Don't try to outrun them, drive somewhere with people and call immediately. My phone already had a full battery this time. I dialed 911 before they could get any closer. The dispatcher answered, and I calmly explained that the vehicle involved in my previous report had found me again. She asked for my location and told me deputies were already being notified. She instructed me to stay on the line and avoid stopping under any circumstances. Hearing another person's voice helped me focus. A few minutes later, the truck suddenly accelerated and pulled beside me. The passenger looked directly at me, smiling exactly the way he had that first night. He lifted his hand and slowly waved. Then both men fell back behind me again. The dispatcher heard me breathing harder and kept asking if I was okay. I told her they were still following me. She said the nearest deputy was about 8 minutes away. 8 minutes felt impossible. The truck continued shadowing me until flashing blue lights appeared in the distance ahead. Relief hit me so hard I almost started laughing. A sheriff's cruiser was parked on the shoulder waiting. As soon as the deputy pulled onto the road behind the pickup, everything changed. The truck accelerated violently, crossed the center line, and attempted to flee. Another patrol vehicle joined from a side road, and suddenly the quiet highway turned into a full pursuit. The dispatcher told me to pull safely onto the shoulder and remain inside my vehicle. I watched the flashing lights disappear into the darkness. 20 minutes later, another deputy arrived to speak with me. He asked me to follow him to a nearby intersection where several patrol cars had gathered. The black pickup sat in a ditch with heavy front-end damage after the driver lost control trying to avoid a spike strip. Both suspects had been arrested. I expected to feel victorious, but instead I felt strangely empty. While officers photographed the scene, one investigator approached me carrying a small evidence bag. Inside was a stack of printed photographs recovered from the truck. Every single one showed me. Some were taken outside my office. Others were taken near my apartment. A few showed me loading groceries into my car days before I found the threatening note. They hadn't randomly chosen me on the highway that first night. They had followed me afterward, learned where I worked, and waited for another opportunity. Investigators later told me both men had long criminal histories involving assault, intimidation, and violent road rage incidents across multiple counties. They believed my horn that first night had triggered their anger, and instead of letting it go, they became obsessed with proving they could frighten me. Because I had reported everything immediately, preserved the note, and cooperated with investigators, prosecutors were able to connect them to several similar cases involving other drivers who had been threatened but never identified the suspects. Months later, I testified in court. Neither man looked at me during the hearing. They eventually received lengthy prison sentences for multiple offenses, including aggravated assault, stalking, and attempting to force another vehicle off the road. Friends often ask if I still enjoy driving. The truth is I do, but not the way I used to. Every time someone tailgates me, screams through an open window, or tries to bait me into reacting, I remember how quickly one impatient driver turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. I simply move over, let them pass, and keep going, because I learned something on that empty highway that no driver's education class ever teaches you. Sometimes the safest way to win an argument on the road is to never have it in the first place.